First and foremost, before I start today's video, I just want to say that I am moving back to this format for my videos because I think it's something that can be a little bit more personal. It can be a little bit more engaging, and you can see me on camera, and then also you can see the articles on video as well, so you can kind of follow along if you want to follow along, of course. Now, I can't keep any promises that this is going to be the new format on my YouTube channel forever, just because every once in a while, to be honest with you guys, I do get bored with my format here on YouTube, and I do like to change things up. So there is no promises that this is going to be the main one, but at least for the time being, this is going to be the format that I actually stick to because I'm really liking this format a whole lot. That's why I decided to go back to this format. Another thing to keep in mind is if you kind of want to get a glimpse of what everything I'm talking about in each and every episode, if you look on the top of the screen, you can see all the tabs that I currently have opened for this video, and you can kind of see what I'm going to talk about in this video. So keep that in mind if you are curious of what's to come in this video. But without further ado, let's actually start this video. First off, it looks like Samsung is going to discontinue some of Bixby's AR features this month, and honestly, I don't think anyone's upset or anyone's like mad about this whole situation, just because if you look at Bixby, I know nobody likes Bixby, to be honest, especially the tech enthusiasts like me myself. This thing was pretty much a gimmick. It really wasn't even worth your time to use something like Bixby, and Bixby was a Samsung exclusive assistant, kind of like Google or kind of like Siri or kind of like Cortana or the Amazon Echo devices. It was like that, but it was exclusive to Samsung devices since it was a Samsung made assistant. And honestly, I never really understood why would they want to make an assistant when there is already the Google Assistant, and the Google Assistant is amazing. And when you buy an Android smartphone, especially a Samsung one, you just end up using the Google Assistant if you use any assistants at all. And that's something I never really understood. Why waste your time doing this? And it's not the first time they actually had an assistant. You may not know this, but a long time ago, like back during like the S3, the Note 2 days, they actually had an assistant, believe it or not. It didn't really have a name like Bixby. It had a name like the Samsung Assistant or something, just generic, but I did use it once and it was not even worth your time. It didn't even answer most of your questions. And then the real problem with their assistants is the fact that their voices sound very robotic and just don't sound fun to use at all. So yeah, and the one thing about Bixby I don't understand as well is the fact that, first of all, they did actually end up putting a dedicated button on a lot of their Samsung devices to kind of like force you to want to use this assistant. But let's be honest, most people weren't going to use it to begin with. So why even put a dedicated button on your actual smartphone to activate Bixby, which I think was a waste of time. And then another thing that really I didn't understand as well is why come out with an assistant like that and then never really develop on top of it. So basically they released Bixby, but they never really got more features, or they never really matured Bixby to where it was something that was going to be usable and something that everyone was going to like. It just pretty much was a thing they threw out there to see if people were going to use, but in the long haul, they didn't really develop for it. So it's kind of like it just sat there on most people's phones being unusable and dead, and it makes sense. I wouldn't use it. Why would you use it? It's not good. And especially when you have things like the Google Assistant, everyone's going to pick the Google Assistant over something like Bixby, because Bixby just doesn't make sense, to be honest. But yeah, it is confirmed from this article, Samsung is going to discontinue some of Bixby's AR features this month. That does not mean that they're discontinuing Bixby altogether. Of course, eventually they will probably discontinue Bixby because, like I said, they can probably see that nobody in their mom's using Bixby. It doesn't make sense for people to use Bixby. It just was a waste of time, to be honest, on their smartphone. So it's eventually going to go away, but right now it's not going away. They are just discontinuing some of its AR features. I will say, no matter how many people bash Bixby or people don't like it, I can confidently say that Bixby was actually an assistant that actually had some features that were different than Google's, I do believe. Like, for instance, one of the features that was actually kind of fun to use was the fact that I think you could scan stuff in the real world and then it would bring it up on the internet for you to buy it, and it would show you different prices for items that you may not know about or you wanted to learn more information about. I thought that was kind of cool, but just the fact it was kind of slow, the voice didn't sound too good, it didn't answer most of your questions. It was like, yeah, this assistant is pointless. So yeah, goodbye AR features for Bixby. No one's really going to miss you. Now, the next one is actually about gaming, because we do have some brand new gaming news here. Now, it looks like the beloved, I don't know if it's technically beloved, but at least one of the good Need for Speed games, Hot Pursuit, back on the 360 and PS3 era, is actually getting a remaster. And that is actually very cool, because this game is a very cool game. If you've never played Need for Speed Hot Pursuit, I really recommend playing Need for Speed Hot Pursuit. But the thing I want to talk about specifically is the fact that just like any other console, EA is treating the Switch crowd or the Nintendo crowd pretty much as second-class citizens here. And honestly, I'm not too surprised about this. EA just has a lot of beef with Nintendo, especially last generation. They weren't really happy with the Wii U and how things turned out for their games when they put some of their games on the Wii U in terms of sales figures. But again, that had to do a lot with what type of games they brought to the Wii U, and the fact the Wii U had bad marketing to begin with, and you know the Wii U only sold 13 million units, so how can you expect EA to be successful on a platform that's not really good to begin with and not really successful? They can't be, so it's kind of hard to say, oh yeah, we're just going to screw over Nintendo fans altogether because we had bad past experiences with bad past consoles. And I hate time and time again how EA always has this thing where they say, yeah, unfortunately people on Nintendo consoles don't really buy EA games, so it's like, why even waste your time putting our games on Nintendo consoles? But then again, it's kind of their fault to begin with. But basically, what's going on with Need for Speed Hot Pursuit is it's coming to all platforms. But the thing is, though, the Switch is going to get a delayed release for Need for Speed Hot Pursuit. It's actually going to be coming out a week later rather than the same week as the PC, PS4, and Xbox One versions. Granted, that's not a long wait to wait for this game. You only have to wait a week after the initial release of this game to get it on the Switch if you want to buy it for the Switch. I do know when it comes to Switch specifically, there have been a lot of games in the past that have been late to the party, like for instance the Crash Insane trilogy. I do know Doom Eternal's still up in the air. It's been so many months since the initial release back in May of this year that Doom Eternals may come to the Switch next year, honestly. So it's not just EA that's actually putting the game out late on Switch. A lot of companies develop these games late for the Switch. It's kind of unfortunate, but at least the upside is you're only waiting a week, and I think a week's not a long time to wait. But regardless, this should not be a thing just because a lot of people will be swayed to buy the game on other consoles just because they don't want to wait a week. A week is still a week to a lot of people, and if you want to play the game right then and there and you want it as fast as possible, then of course you're going to go with another system. So it's not fair to Nintendo Switch owners that you have to wait a week to get this game. I don't know if they're not done developing this game or they're just being bad to Nintendo Switch users and like, yeah, we'll give them a rough time since we don't like Nintendo anyway and our games don't sell well anyway, so we have nothing to lose there. But in the long scheme of things, it does matter, and you will lose a couple of sales here or there just because, again, your game's not coming to the Switch the same day that the other ones have come to. And another thing I don't understand about EA and this whole thing about, oh yeah, our games don't sell well on Nintendo platforms to begin with. First of all, at least with the Switch specifically, you're not really releasing a lot of games, so how can people buy your games in the first place if you're not developing games for the system? And then second of all, just like a recent release this year with one of their games, Burnout Paradise. Burnout Paradise came to the Switch, but nobody wanted to buy Burnout Paradise because Burnout Paradise was extremely expensive for what it was. It came out, I think, at $50, I want to say, for the Switch version, and that's pretty much unacceptable for a game that's decades old, especially when this game can be bought on other platforms for $40. So it's kind of like you're killing your own game here. You're releasing a game that's decades old, and then on top of that, you are releasing a game that is practically full price at that. I would understand if this is a current gen game like on PS4 or the Xbox One, and then you're releasing it to the Switch, and then you're charging full price for that game, even if it's a little bit older. But this game is decades old, and that's unacceptable for Burnout Paradise. So you can see why a lot of people were upset about that and why a lot of people didn't buy that. And then you tell me again, time and time again, EA games don't sell well on Nintendo platforms. Well, it's really your fault for not releasing a lot of games, and some games are just way too expensive for what they are, and I'm not happy about this. And honestly, you shouldn't really be surprised about this because it is a common theme that EA just treats Nintendo fans like second-class citizens, and they have nothing to blame but their self here for everything that they did wrong with the Nintendo crowd. And that's why EA gets really a bad reputation in the gaming industry, not just with the Nintendo crowd, but with gamers as a whole, because they have done a lot of shady things when it comes to video game releases, when it comes to microtransactions, when it comes to being greedy. EA is definitely one of those companies that's high on the bar when it comes to treating video game fans like absolutely utter crap, and it's just the sad truth. And I'm not just saying that. Everyone knows that EA is one of the worst video game companies literally of all time. They just want to make money, 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 and that's pretty much all they actually care about. Now, the next one is actually about the Nvidia graphics card situation, because when the RTX 3080 came out, there wasn't a lot of supply to begin with, and a lot of people never got 3080 and were actually upset. But now it looks like the CEO of Nvidia actually anticipates supply shortages for the RTX 3080 and 3090 to last until 2021. And honestly, I'm not really surprised about this news, just because if you look at 2020 as a whole, 2020 is the year of the pandemic, and there is a lot of things that are slowing down manufacturing. There's also a lot of things that are making it very difficult for them to keep up with demand. And of course, another thing that's really hurting these graphics cards is the fact that there are a lot of scalpers nowadays compared to many, many years ago. There are just more scalpers, it seems like, each and every year. And now it's even worse when there's already programs like bounce alerts. If you don't know anything, there is this program called bounce alerts where it'll pretty much just buy all the stock from one website immediately, and they get an advantage there. So a lot of this stock's not even going to people who generally want to buy it. It's going to people who generally want to resell this, and that's absolutely disgusting. Me, myself, I've never tried to scalp something. If you don't know what scalping is pretty much where you buy something at a retail price and then you resell it for much more than it's going for on the retail market, and that's not acceptable. It's not the same thing as like old rare collectible, because usually when you buy an old rare collectible for a very high price, it's usually no longer manufactured, and most people are like, yeah, that's okay that this thing is no longer manufactured, so I'm okay paying a very high price for it because you can no longer get it. So I'm at the mercy of people who collected it and who owned it and who have a copy. They're going to charge extremely high for this thing. If you want this thing, because it's very rare and very sought after, you have to pay a price. But when you're charging like 100% or 110 or 200% higher than what it comes out at retail price, and they're still selling it at a retail setting, it's just not fair to the consumers who want to buy that. And that's ultimately what's hurting the RTX manufacturing, not just the fact that these are very good graphics cards to begin with compared to the 2000 series. Everybody wants these, and then the fact that people are scalping them, and the fact that manufacturing is really rough in 2020. Yeah, I'm not really too surprised about that. And if you're looking forward to getting a RTX 3080 or 3090, all I can really say is, yeah, you're probably not going to get one anytime soon unless you're super desperate and you want to pay for one of these cards on like the aftermarket or the black market, like things like eBay and stuff like that. But again, you're going to be paying an extremely high price, and honestly, I wouldn't recommend it. That's just throwing fuel in the fire for the scalpers, and then that's also you're just paying way too much. Like, I've seen some 3080s, which normally go for, I think, around 500. Correct me if I'm wrong. They're going for like $500, but then on the our $499, no, $600. Anyway, basically they're very cheap, around $400, $500, $600 for the 3080, and then on the aftermarket with sites like eBay, you go to eBay right now and that thing is extremely expensive. I'm talking like $2,000. Is anybody in their right mind going to pay $2,000 for that graphics card, a 3080? By that point, you're better off buying the 3090 for only like $1,500, because it just doesn't make sense. But I know people are desperate, and people are always going to put fuel on the fire, and that's something I'm not okay with. And especially, I'm not happy about people who are so desperate they need to put fuel in the fire and actually help the scalpers. That's why generally the scalping business always works, because there's always those set of people who say, yeah, I do not care about scalping. All I want to do is buy this product, and if this is the only way I can buy this product, then I am going to sink low and actually support these scalpers and buy it. And then that's why it's going to continue scalpers to be able to do this in the long haul, because people are subjecting themselves to these scalpers, which is not good. But yeah, it sucks. If you want one of these graphics cards, you may be able to get one, but then may not be able to get one. Now, the next one is actually about the Apple TV right here. You can read this article. It looks like the Apple TV is now going to allow you to play YouTube videos in 4K. Before, you couldn't play YouTube videos in 4K. I think the highest resolution was 1080p for the Apple TV, and it looks like there are some limitations here. I think one of the limitations is you are going to be stuck with watching the content at 30 frames per second, but I think that's not really a big deal breaker. To have this at all on the Apple TV is actually a pretty nice feature, because again, for a while now, Apple TV users haven't had the chance to watch YouTube videos in 4K. So even if you can watch them at only 30 frames per second, I would take the trade-off, even if I can't watch a 60 frame per second video on YouTube, because 4K is still 4K, and that's still better, and it's still an option for you. And I think most people are okay, especially with video, to watch videos at 30 compared to 60 frames per second. And they did state that unfortunately, even though the Apple TV got YouTube 4K support, it looks like the iPads and the iPhones aren't getting 4K support. It has to do with some of the codec. I do believe that the iPhone and the iPad run, they just aren't capable of running things like that on sites like YouTube and other places. But honestly, for those devices, specifically iPads and iPhones, it doesn't really matter all that much, because you do have to realize one thing with those devices. Those devices are so small to begin with that moving from 1080p to 4K wouldn't really matter all that much. It's not like you're gaining a lot. And then you do have to realize with the iPads and the iPhones, there's no device out there that Apple makes currently that does have a 4K display. Even though these devices don't have a 4K display, it does technically kind of matter, because anytime you do have higher resolutions than 1080p, even if your screen doesn't technically support it, you do see a bump in resolution, and technically it does look a little bit crispier. But I'm telling you, for the most part and for most people, it's not really a big deal. But I will say, no matter what, it would have been nice if instead of just putting it on the Apple TV, I wish the iPad and the iPhones would actually allow you to watch YouTube videos in 4K and some other places, but it's not available yet. But I guess on the other hand, it's nice. At least the Apple TV got 4K support. If the Apple TV gets 4K support when it comes to YouTube videos, then I'm sure in the near future, things like the iPad and the iPhone will eventually get 4K support. It's just a matter of time, because it makes sense, and they don't want to fall behind with other devices that can technically already support 4K when it comes to the mobile landscape. So I can definitely see that being a thing. And then the next one up is actually going to be about the PS5, because it looks like in Japan they are changing the way the PlayStation controller is going to work. So basically, if you're unfamiliar with PlayStation in Japan, they pretty much play the PlayStation a little bit different than they do here in America. Basically, how they play the PlayStation, you guys know with the regular UI of the PlayStation here in America, if you want to access anything on your home screen, you usually press the X button, because the X button or the cross button, which Sony actually confirmed that's the real name of it, the cross button. So if you press the cross button here in America, it will pretty much mean that you're accepting something on the screen, and that's pretty much how it's always been. But in Japan, that's not the case. The circle button or the O button was the button to actually confirm stuff on their actually PlayStation, and then the cross button was the cancel button there in Japan. But now it looks like Sony is actually changing their tune, and they want to make Japan the same as everywhere else in the world, and they want to make sure that the cross button is the accept button in Japan. And a lot of people aren't actually happy about this, and I've actually heard people on the internet that are Japanese fans of Sony say, yeah, I'm not buying your PlayStation because now you're making us retrain our brain. But honestly, I don't think this is a big deal, because I have actually played games from other regions from another Sony console when I had one, and I had to press circle on their games to actually confirm things. And honestly, it really wasn't that big a deal, and it only took me a second to learn this, so I don't understand why a lot of Japanese players are actually complaining about this. I do know a lot of people are stuck in their ways. It's just human nature to get used to something and then complain later on when something changes. I mean, again, it is what it is. But for me, it's not really that big of a deal. But I understand. It's probably not just the fact that they have to retrain their brain. It's probably also due to the fact that if you think about it, they're probably mad because it used to be a staple of Japanese PlayStation, and they want to be different from other parts of the world, so they want to just have that satisfaction probably that they're like, yeah, the Japanese PlayStations are cool because we can be slightly different with our circle button being confirmed instead of the cross button being confirmed. But it is what it is, and honestly, I think everyone will agree that changing the confirm button in Japan is not really a big enough deal that you wouldn't buy a PlayStation. I think if you have the right mind and you really want the PlayStation 5 regardless of this news coming out, I think you would still buy the PlayStation. It's not like they're doing something super crazy to where it would make you not want to buy it. It's not that big a deal, but it is what it is. And honestly, all I can say about this news is it's kind of interesting that Sony did decide to do that. Either way, I guess you just have to deal with it. Now let's actually talk about this. I actually talked about this before in a previous episode, but I wanted to talk a little bit more about PS5 games being pretty expensive here. We're talking $10 more than their current gen counterparts. Now, I don't know how many games next generation are actually going to be $70 compared to $60, but either way, it is going to hurt our wallets, and overall it is going to hurt sales no matter what, just because games are going to be more expensive, and especially now in 2020 when there's a big crisis going on, it's even going to hurt more, and a lot of people aren't going to buy as many games as they once did. Now, luckily, with this whole situation, not every game is going to be costing $70. It looks like it's a mixed bag. Some games are going to be $60, and then some games are going to be $70. It really just depends on the company, and it depends on the game and things like that. It's really more of a shame for a game to come out at $70, especially when it has microtransactions. Once the game has microtransactions, it's kind of like, yeah, why even raise the price to $70 when you already have microtransactions? And in the gaming industry, it's already confirmed up to this point that games that have microtransactions actually make more money off the microtransactions than the initial shell of the actual video game. But I understand more money is more money, and then a lot of these companies too do tell you that the cost of game development is going up because games are getting bigger, they're getting much more complex and things like that, so they have to charge things like $70. But then again, I don't understand why some companies are charging $70 for these games when literally other games on the game market are still $60. So it's not like it's a thing across the whole gaming industry. It's only certain companies up to this point. But either way, it's not good news, because if these companies decide to charge $70 for these games, you do know later down the road, some companies will decide, yeah, if other companies can get away with $70 price tags, then we're going to start charging $70 for our game. So eventually I can see every game in the gaming industry becoming $70 for a AAA game, and that's something I'm kind of not happy about, and I think a lot of people agree this is going to hurt the gaming industry as a whole. I'm okay with paying $70. I'm not saying $70 is not worth it. It's okay for a game to come out with $70, but just don't bombard us with microtransactions. And at least if you do the microtransactions, which are unacceptable, only do cosmetic ones like costumes and clothing. Don't do things that are going to be game changers. And then a lot of these companies, on top of just the microtransactions, also ask you for things like, oh, buy this season pass or buy this DLC, and games only get more expensive out the gate. So it is kind of unacceptable. And then you do have to realize as well, if you live in places like Canada, Canada games are way more expensive to begin with. So if you raise the price of these games in Canada, they're even going to get more expensive, and that means a lot of people in Canada could practically only buy like 1 or 2 games a year because of how expensive they are. But then again, video games as a whole was never an expensive thing to get, was never an inexpensive thing to get into. It was always an expensive thing with things like buying the console, buying the controllers, buying these memberships, buying the video games, buying all these different things. It just adds up, and that's pretty much what you expect with things like video games. Of course, video games were always expensive. And then the last one on my list is actually about the iPad Air 4, because as we know, the iPad Air 4 that's coming out, I think this month, is going to be the first Apple device to actually have the A14 Bionics chip in here. And they actually did some benchmarks for the A14 Bionics chip, and you may be wondering how this thing actually fares. So there are some scores right there for the A14 Bionic chip, and a lot of people were actually trying to answer the question, is the A14 Bionic chip actually going to be faster than what we already currently have in something like the iPad Pro 2020? Because even though this is a brand new chip, it theoretically shouldn't be faster than what we have in the iPad Pro 2020, just because the Pro is their top of the line, and this iPad Air 4 is a much more cheaper device. So it would be weird to have a cheaper device have a much more faster chipset than their premium tablets. But it looks like it is kind of a weird situation going on with the A14 Bionics chip. Let's go ahead and look at this. Right here, it says, if we compare it to the A12Z chip from the 2020 iPad Pro, the A14 Bionic chip performs better in single core, with the A12 achieving a 1119 score. However, the multi-score of the A12Z chip is higher, since the iPad Pro CPU has 8 cores, while the A14 chip found on iPad Air 4 only has 6. In other words, the A14 chip is 41% faster than the A12Z chip found in the iPad Pro 2020, but nearly 10% slower in multi-core. So the thing is, though, it's very weird. As they just stated, in single-core performance, it looks like the A14, it looks like in other words, I'm sorry, I'm like kind of confused here as well. It looks like the A14 chip is 41% faster than the A12Z chip. Yes, in single core performance, it is going to be faster, 41% faster, at least 9 to 5 Mac claims. But then in multi-core performance, it looks like it's going to be 10% slower. So what does that mean? Theoretically, that means that technically the iPad Pro should still be a faster device without a doubt compared to the iPad Air 4. That does make sense, just because that is a much more expensive device. So forget the single core performance when you're doing hard tasks like maybe video editing or maybe gaming specifically. That's where I still think the A12Z chip is going to kick the A14's butt in those type of things. Now, from a day-to-day standpoint, I think most people aren't even going to care about the different performances, and we're talking about tech enthusiasts, and both these are going to be monsters of chips. But I'm just telling you how it is, in my opinion, coming from these specs and this performance leak. I do believe that, again, the A12Z is still going to be a monster when it comes to specifically hardcore tasks like hardcore gaming, video editing, photo editing, those types of tasks. I think that's where this thing still is going to be better. And then you do have to realize as well, the iPad Air 4 versus the iPad Pros are going to have more RAM. So you take in consideration the more RAM and the multi-core score for the A12Z, I do think overall it's going to be way better for hardcore tasks. Not to say that the A14 is a slump. In no stretch of the imagination is the A14 going to be an absolutely bad chip. It's just that compared to that, I think it'll still win it. But it should be the case since, again, I said it was their premium tablet, and it would be weird, again, if the A14 came out and the iPad Air 4, which is a cheaper device, and somehow it beat the iPad Pros, which is their top of the line. It just doesn't make sense. But again, you are seeing some substantial gains when it comes to single core performance, and they did state, of course, it should be A12Z, of course, will definitely be beaten out with the A14X or the A14Z, whatever they're going to call the next chip after the A14. But right now we're in kind of a weird situation where the lower end tablet compared to the iPad Pro is getting a brand new chip, and the iPad Pro 2020 has kind of an older chipset, which is kind of interesting. And yeah, I think that's going to be it for today's episode. Anyway, guys, this is Wayne from My Tech News, signing out.